All right, so thanks, Jorge, for joining and learning a little bit more about you and your campaign. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and also what district and area of town are you running for there?
For sure, and thank you for having me, Robert. So my name is Jorge Granados. I am running to be the next state representative for House District 99, which covers the unincorporated part of Norcross, Lilburn, and Tucker.
What was the last one?
Tucker?
Sumter. Like, how do you spell that? I'm sorry.
Tucker.
Oh, Tucker, sorry.
Tucker.
Yeah, I actually do spend a great deal of time over in that area. But it sounds like your district has, as you mentioned, parts of cities and parts of counties, which will be relevant here in a little bit there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. But yes, I'm running to be the next state representative for House District 99 since our current representative, Brenda Lopez Romero, is actually running to be our next congresswoman for District 7, which covers a little bit of, the western northern part of Gwinnett into southern Forsyth. And I've actually worked with Brenda for the past 3 years at the Capitol, so I know what needs to get done at the Capitol and what is expected from me to get things done over there. I'm currently managing 2 Brewster's ice cream stores here in Gwinnett County, and one of them is actually within the district that I'm running for. So I'm very familiar with all the customers, all the people that come out, all the kids that come out and get some ice cream, and they always talk to me about like whatever issues that's going on or whatever flavors they're more interested in.
Yeah, very interesting. And I'm just curious, with the day job there, are they supportive of your run? Do they even know about it?
Oh, yeah, they do. I've actually talked to the owner, I think like about a month or so before I officially announced that I was running for office. And he was very supportive, even though he tells me that he's not very politically involved, but it's very encouraging to seeing me run for office, being more involved in our political system.
Yeah, very interesting. So if I'm not mistaken, when I did a little bit of research, it's you and one contender, but it sounds like there is going to be a primary between the two of you, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yes, so there will be a primary election. It will be on May 19, 2020. So we want to make sure we're actually, right now, what my campaign is doing is knocking on doors, communicating with everyone in the community and making sure that they know what's happening, because our current representative will be running for another seat, so she'll be leaving her current seat in order to run for Congress.
Oh, okay. So she's actually leaving that district. So going back to the primary, is it going to be between you and another blue candidate, or is it just going to be, you think, you and a red candidate?
It's going to be me and another Democratic candidate, so it'll be the two of us. From my understanding is that there hasn't been a Republican candidate in a good while, maybe about a decade or so. So this district is very heavily populated with Democrat voters, so we want to make sure we continue having this district Democrat.
Oh, that's also interesting to hear. So the Republicans just kind of gave up on that district because they just knew they couldn't win it.
Yeah, it's been a while since a Republican candidate has even showed up in the district. But yeah, after the primary election, we'll see who becomes the next state representative.
Yeah, interesting. So let's get down to a couple of issues. And we, before we line this up, you were looking on education, transit, and affordable housing. Mm-hmm. I'll just kind of let you take one of those and run with it a little bit. What's your main, topic out of those three, or main, position?
So what I've seen and experienced here in the district is mainly on transportation. I know back in March earlier this year, we had a MARTA referendum special election where everyone in Gwinnett County were to vote for or against expanding MARTA into Gwinnett County. Unfortunately, it did not pass So I know the county commissioners, the county chair, right now are looking at other alternatives. They're seeing what they can do about trying to see if they can expand MARTA into Gwinnett County once again. I'm not sure. The rumor has it that they might end up putting the vote again in November of next year. But speaking with a lot of constituents for the past several months, they've all been telling me about issues with transportation. They were excited to see MARTA on the ballot, but disappointed on failing.
Yeah, and there is no shortage of sitting in traffic in Atlanta, Georgia. And I've even, this goes all the way back to when I was in college eons ago, and I took a public administration class, and the instructor said building more lanes of traffic does not really solve much of anything. All you're just going to add is just more lanes of traffic for people to sit in. And it's concerning that, I live over here in Marietta and Cobb. On the other side of town, they have done, similar things over here with the hot lanes or the Lexus lanes. It's not sustainable. And all of those cars sitting in traffic, polluting our air. I mean, I'm sure we're going to have a summer again of some smog alerts because of all this, traffic. It's just not sustainable. And I was also going to ask, since your district is part of Gwinnett County, I did an interview with Kurt Thompson. I'm not sure if you know him.
Oh yeah. We've actually spoken several different occasions. He seems to be like a very good candidate for the chair, but I know he has a lot on his plate trying to go through with I know there's like several others that are running for the same seat that he is running for.
But I didn't know if you two happen to agree, because sometimes. And even over here in Cobb, it's been interesting that the counties and sometimes cities actually hire lobbyists just to simply go down the road to the Gold Dome to talk to the other representatives. But I'm curious in your chats there, if specifically with Kurt, because I did speak to him, but if there were any potential ideas. Okay, is it a train? Is it a bus? So if there is some sort of referendum that happens for Gwinnett or northeast Metro Atlanta, have there been any proposals or anything that you happen to like?
I did hear about different proposals. I know they were talking about maybe adding more bus routes or bus stops into Gwinnett County, trying to add more, maybe adding a light rail into Gwinnett County, like right in the middle of Gwinnett County, to help out with, alleviate some of the traffic that happens between there and here and there. Those are some of the good proposals that I've heard. I know others still would recommend having the heavy rail, MARTA, expanding into Gwinnett County, because that connecting MARTA with Gwinnett County would give a lot of people better advantage in getting on the MARTA and then traveling downtown to avoid being stuck in traffic. But I did hear. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I was going to say also over here in Smyrna, over here in Cobb, there is a transit study actually currently underway. And, the article, I think they paid in the hundreds of thousands of dollars just for someone to come in and run a survey and see what it might be. Has there been anything quite like that over in your part of town?
I have not heard of anything. I think I did. It didn't catch my eye that moment, but I do remember hearing something where they're trying to see what other alternatives they might try to work, or they actually have a committee they have a committee meetings here in Gwinnett County trying to talk about some of the studies that they have done, where they're trying to add more bus stops. I think they have one more either sometime this week or next week, or I think that was already over for the year. But they do have committee meetings here, and they talk about some of the issues from other taxpayers or business owners, seeing what ideas do they have or they can propose in order to make a better transit system in here in Gwinnett County.
Gotcha. And then the folks that you happen to talk to, day in and day out, are there complaints that, of course, I'm sure you hear traffic But these bus routes, these train routes, they don't happen necessarily overnight. Is there any particular kind of story that you can think about, one of potentially your new constituents has shared with you that just kind of really, why you're putting all of your heart into the transit part?
Yes, actually, this happened it happened last week when I was talking with a few people, and I was telling him he was asking me for some change for for the bus, and I asked him a couple of questions about like if he knew how often the buses came through or what times. He wasn't too sure when and where the buses would come. I know there's a bus stop in front of one of my locations, but he's not 100% sure when and where these buses come through. Sometimes they come in later, sometimes they come in a little earlier, but it's very hard to have people understand how the bus schedule is and where the bus stops are located. So those are a couple of complaints I've heard from constituents about our current transit system.
Gotcha. And I go back and remembering, the origins of MARTA, and now are they going to keep the name MARTA, or is that under change? I can't remember.
I believe they might end up changing. I'm not 100% sure. I know they call it like the ATL Transit or something similar to that. I'm not 100% sure if they are going to change it for sure.
Gotcha. But if I'm not mistaken, and I'm going to make a guesstimation, I think MARTA has been around longer than you potentially. Is that right?
I believe so. I believe it was built in the 80s or something, much, maybe a decade longer than I have been alive here.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. The rail routes, I'm from South Georgia. I remember coming up to Atlanta and riding on MARTA. And because outside of Metro Atlanta, you have nothing like the trains. And, being downtown and, those rail lines obviously are just vital. But once you get out into the suburbs, some pushback that I even heard, I fly a good bit for my day job, and there was a flight attendant at Delta that, we just happened to stumble across in the middle of the flight talking about, transit. And she lives deep into our district over here in District 11, north of here. And one of the first things that just caught my eye, or as she started saying, she goes, well, what about all that crime that public transit is going to bring into an area? And I had to breathe deeply before I responded to this. But why do you think there is a perception in Metro Atlanta about, the transit bringing in crime? I don't know if you've heard. I think I'm going to guesstimate, your district. You may not hear this, but if this is going to be another referendum in Gwinnett, surely you've at least heard that argument, and I don't think it's substantiated whatsoever.
Yeah, I hear the same thing, too, from the other side, where people are saying, if we expand MARTA into Gwinnett County, it's going to increase crime. And it's very difficult to, say that these people have been thinking about it in the wrong way, because it doesn't really bring crime at all. Maybe they assume how Atlanta is now with everything that's going on in Atlanta, homelessness, crime, traffic. They assume that with all that's happening in Atlanta, it might happen the same thing here in Gwinnett County, which is not necessarily true. In Sandy Springs, I know they have a MARTA transit. They have a station up there, and I don't see a lot of crime happening up there, or in Chamblee or Dunwoody. Which is very odd for me, because I don't know if these people that are saying that the crime rate might rise, I don't know if they've actually been on the MARTA before or not. I've been on the MARTA a few different occasions trying to get to downtown for maybe the soccer games that's happening or any festivals that's happening in downtown. So I use the MARTA every so often whenever I have a chance. And I rarely see any crime around the areas.
Yeah, agreed. And I recall a business trip out of Sacramento, California, that's the capital out there. And I was able to stay downtown, walk to a light rail train, and that rail train took me all the way out to the office park. I think it was actually a single ride. I maybe had to transfer once or something like that. Something like that in Metro Atlanta is unheard of, but yet Sacramento, I believe, is about a fifth of the population that we have in Metro Atlanta. And I've even gone to some of my representatives and said it's honestly embarrassing that we have a town that is trying to seek tax breaks, trying to bring all these workers. Well, if your workers can't get to their job in less than an hour or so, what does it make any sense for them to even move here and take that job? And
right.
it's not sustainable, the current, path that, Georgia's administration is, and I don't know what it's going to take for people to realize. I guess, just sitting in traffic for 4 hours, maybe eventually people will get the clue here, but it's just not sustainable. The growth that the area is just going to, that we have now and the growth that's coming.
Correct. That's right. Like, I was talking with someone a couple weeks ago who said that her husband was stuck in traffic for almost 3 hours just driving from Atlanta back to Gwinnett County, which is absurd. And I've been on the trains in D.C. and New York and Los Angeles, and they've worked perfectly fine. I rarely saw any crime around the areas. I felt safe riding in those heavy rail trains in those places I've been to.
Yeah. So I think we beat that horse a good bit. I was going to move next on to education. I'm curious just about your education background. I assume you're a native to the area over there, right?
Of course, yeah. I've actually graduated from Meadow Creek High School, which is a part of the district that I'm running for. I graduated back in 2011, and I'm currently a student at Georgia State University majoring in business administration. So I've been on and off semesters for college while working full-time, working other smaller jobs here and there, and going back to school at the same time. So that's my background for education. I've been through the whole public school system, and I've enjoyed everything that I've done so far.
Yeah, and I had a little bit of a similar path. I'm from South Georgia, moved up to Metro Atlanta, and finished my master's. At the time, it was Southern Polytechnic, but that's kind of what we'll get into here, too, in a second. The state, in whatever wisdom, decided to merge the school with Kennesaw State. So I have to claim, Kennesaw State, and actually my associate's degree from Albany was from Darton College. And again, and one of the decisions that the Board of Regents made, Darton has now been merged with Albany State. So 2 of the diplomas I'm actually staring at, those institutions don't exist anymore. So I have to actually claim that I'm alumni of the new institution. That is what it is. But we've also seen a general precedent there set by the leadership of the state to shrink funding for higher education. And tuition, as a result, has not gone down. Now, thankfully, I am a child of the Hope Scholarship. I was on the Hope gravy train at the time. And, the Hope Scholarship paid for all of my undergraduate. And it's a great program, but there's kind of devil's advocate concerns about the Hope Scholarship. As tuition rises, you can only sell, $5, $10, $20 lottery tickets to help compensate for this. And a lot of people look at the lottery as being you're taxing the folks that don't really need to be really involved in this, or trying to get a jackpot that you're more likely to get hit by lightning from. So I don't know if I would assume you've at least taken advantage of the Hope Scholarship, or maybe you're attaining to that. But looking at higher education, any of those topics kind of jump out at you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was not a recipient for the Hope Scholarship because of my grades, because I've been working full-time around the same time while still going to high school. So I've been working with Brewsters for almost 12 years now, working with them full-time while still going to school, trying to make sure that we had at least a roof over our heads, because back at that time, it was like around 2008, 2009 when I started working. There was a lot of, the recession was happening. We almost lost our house. Our utilities were getting cut off here and there. we barely had any food on the table. So I ended up taking the initiative of working full-time while still going to school at the same time. So my grades weren't that great in high school, but I managed to bring it up, but I still could not get the Hope Scholarship. But I've seen a lot of people. I entertained the idea with a lot of my siblings too, because they're interested in going back to school, making sure that they have their higher education as well. But with tuition, unfortunately for me, I had to pay out of pocket for most of these, for all my tuition, because I didn't have the grades. Scholarships were out of reach for me, or I didn't have enough time because of work in order to apply for those scholarships. Tuition's been very hard to pay, and I couldn't get any loans because when I was younger, my credit wasn't that great, so I couldn't apply for any student loans as such, and I tried, and they said I need a cosigner. My family couldn't co-sign for me. I couldn't get any of my friends to co-sign, so I was just stuck trying to pay for tuition out of pocket while I was working and making sure that we still had a roof over our heads. So tuition's very hard to get a hold of when you have a lot of things going on and some of the issues that you didn't understand or know to get the proper resources to pay for school.
Yes, certainly, and these are the stories that you're repeating, I'm sure, from some of your potential constituents. I know friends, former current coworkers, that life happens, and it's not necessarily because when I was in high school, I actually did a dual diploma. I was able to do college prep and vocational, and honestly, I think there is if I'm not mistaken, a blue collar shortage in Metro Atlanta, and using some of the trade unions, they express these concerns. But as the older folks that know these trades, plumbing, electrical, HVAC technicians, there seems to be a constant demand, or even folks that repair cars. We were talking about transit a moment ago, maybe get rid of cars, but that's not going to happen overnight either. But these are very valuable, and it's hard work, but there is a lot of money that can be made in those particular fields, and you don't necessarily have to go to college. So I don't know if you've heard any of those stories, or why you particularly wanted to go to business management school. Just curious.
Yeah, I did hear a bunch of stories like that, and I feel like we need to push harder on our technical school. To push harder on the students to go for technical school, because some of these jobs, there's millions of jobs out there within the technical field, and not many people are really talking about it because it's just hard. I guess they call it hard labor, even though it takes it does take a couple of years to get things straightened out. But we need to put more resources on our technical schools in order to fulfill in order to fill those jobs that we need. I got into the business administration major because of working here at Brewster's Ice Cream. I got interested in the business. I was excited. It was exciting to see how a business ran and how things worked. So I got more involved in the business administration for my field. But yeah, we need to push more resources into technical schools, making sure that we fill those jobs in for sure.
Yeah, and that's a great story that you told, about yourself. I think one of the articles that I, shared with you preparing here, charter schools and or school vouchers. So there have been some stories in the press that the conservative leadership here in Georgia is pushing school vouchers. I think that is a horrible idea. I even had a conversation with a former Cobb County school board member who actually chose to just not run for re-election. And I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think she just kind of threw her hands up and moved on. But Hunter Hill, this goes back a couple of years, but Hunter Hill, tried to run for governor of Georgia, and that did not work out. But one of the things that he was trying to push for were school vouchers. And every time I hear that, I mean, and I even got the admission from the former school board member here in Cobb County, that pulls money from public schools. But it doesn't matter how you look at it. All of those ideas, and I think I even shared one of the story of sometimes these charter schools being a product of public schools here in Georgia, from kindergarten all the way through my master's degree. I never understood why leadership in some areas, they want to pull money from public institutions. No, you need to fund those first, is my opinion of this. And if you choose to go to private school, then you, your family, whatever, okay, you're going to pay that added benefit. But I don't understand why the current administration keeps wanting to pull money out, and especially drastically with the school voucher thing, of taking that money and then putting it into private. And even in some cases, I think they wanted to fund religious, private schools. So I don't know if you've heard of this or researched or what your platform might be for any of those issues.
Yeah, I've heard plenty of things about charter schools and the school vouchers, and I really dislike the idea because, like you said, it does pull money from our public schools. And if you look at many of our schools here in the state, a lot of these schools need the funds in order to rebuild the infrastructure. Some of the schools are actually falling apart. You can see some teachers posting pictures online where some of their school buildings are falling apart, the ceilings in the bathrooms are leaking or falling. Is just not right to pull these funds from these public schools. And part of my platform in my campaign is that I want to make sure that we continue having more resources towards our public schools, because we need our public schools for our kids to enjoy learning, making sure they grow and understand that there is more to come. I've gone through the public school system. I've enjoyed my time there from kindergarten to 12th grade, and I've made a lot of friends, made a lot of connections with the public schools, and taking that away from our current students, I'm not sure how their future might end up. Might not turn out so good, because especially with the school vouchers happening. I talked to another constituent this past month where we talked about the school vouchers. These school vouchers sometimes don't even fund the full tuition for some of the private schools that the parents are trying to enroll their kids in. Let's say one family has 3 kids and they want to enroll them into a private school with the school vouchers. School vouchers will probably pay maybe 50 to 75% of the tuition, but where they're going to get the money for the rest of the tuition or the transportation they have to pay for as well. So that money does add up to a lot of the families when they can't afford they can't afford to have their kids go to these schools. So it's better to have these public schools, because tuition, you don't have to pay for anything for public schools. Transportation is already provided, and it gives everybody a much ease of mind when this is happening with our public schools.
Yeah, for sure. And then specifically, as we spoke about, Spanish being your second language, are there any more specific even struggles that folks that, Spanish being their first language? It's very interesting that you are native Metro Atlanta, and then you said earlier that your primary language is Spanish. I think that's amazing. I think that's great. I only took 2 or 3 years of Spanish back in school, and I can maybe read a little bit. But honestly, being in our huge Metro Atlanta area, is there any specific, issue or any stories that come to mind about someone who may be, Spanish speaking? And I'll invite you again to actually answer that in Spanish.
Thank you. But yes, I've actually been working with a couple of our school administrators, a couple of people that work in the school board, and the main thing that we've talked about is the lack of representation for our Spanish-speaking students, our lack of resources for these students as well. especially in my district, it is also heavily populated with Spanish-speaking families, and many of them have no clue as to what's going on within the students' lives. Many of the parents don't even know what's going on at school for their kids. So there's a lack of representation, lack of administrators, lack of resources for our Spanish-speaking students and families, because everyone is having a hard time. Like for myself, I have a family. My mom is a single parent of 7 children, and we grew up struggling with some of our school until we got into Gwinnett County 19 years ago. 19 years ago. And we were fortunate enough to speak with a couple Spanish-speaking administrators, and they helped my mom with everything, with presents for Christmas, translations for many of our school projects, school work, and conferences when there's parent-teacher conferences as well. And looking back and looking now, it's much harder to see that connection again, because there is some administrators and teachers that do help out, but many of the non-Spanish speaking administrators don't really give it a second thought about helping some of their students that don't know English or speak or they are struggling trying to make that connection with some of the students and their families. So there is a lot of lack of representation, lack of resources, and right now I'm seeing that there is a lot of difficulties that some of these families are going through.
Yeah, and having someone growing up native Spanish speaking, I think would be a very interesting. Now, the current representative in that district, she is, I would assume, also dual language.
Yes. Representative Brenda Lopez, she does speak Spanish and English. So with her, we've actually seen a lot of changes since she got elected. So there's a little bit more resources for our Spanish-speaking families or non-native English speakers families. So there's more resources, a little bit more resources than there was before. But we still have that gap between all those other families that don't have the resources like transportation or any other information that is happening within the schools, or get the parents more involved.
Yeah, and going back to some of these charter schools, some of these alternative schools, one of these, I shared the story with you, that families and students have been swept up into a fight. The Cyber Charter says the company has shut down student computers, told parents to return computers to K-12 Inc., and locked the Cyber Academy's employees out of their emails, probably over funding. And that just is mind-boggling to me. That, okay, you have this whole idea, you want to try to take money away from public schools, and now the private school or the charter school here, they just closed their doors. I guess they assumed that they didn't get enough money. I didn't know if you had a chance to read through that, but then that was just here in August, right before the fall, school went back into this term. And so that leaves folks that said, well, hey, I thought that this charter school thing was a great idea, but now when I get over there, they just shut their doors. That's not, so then are all those folks literally within a 2 or 3 week time period, are they rushing back to the public schools where there may not be enough teachers? And it's almost just like I'm looking at it as a failed experiment. I don't know if you had a chance to read through that.
I've briefly skimmed through it, but yes, it is very difficult to think about it, because we have these charter schools that say it's a good idea to have, but then in the end, we see these schools closing down for whatever reason, not enough funding. Now, our public schools have to take in those students and maybe some teachers in order to sorry, the word escaped me, but to making sure that we have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like it's unfortunate that we see this today happening, and now the schools have to be overworked, and some of especially the teachers, they're going to be overworked trying to have these classrooms overflowed with students that they have to teach and learn, making sure that they get the proper education that they need.
Yeah. And then the last topic that we wanted to move forward to was affordable housing. I'm sure you've actually expressed some, you mentioned earlier in the call there talking about possibly losing your home, and due to just money coming in to pay for all the bills. But there's kind of a concerning thing, and actually it hit home for me. I guess I should have sent you a little more information, but basically there is a development behind our home that is supposed to, I'll put in air quotes, be somewhat affordable housing, and Cobb County has chosen to give that developer tax breaks to build almost 300 apartments next to a Kroger, next to self-storage, next to some other retail, and these tax credits are going to be funded in the form of bonds over here in Cobb County. And we have grave concerns. There's a gentleman over here in Cobb County. He had run for the commission once and didn't quite make it, but he actually himself took that case all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court. And, the first example of it will be the Braves Stadium, and that was extremely unpopular over here in Cobb County when, the current Cobb chair, he was elected basically because the Braves Stadium got moved to Cobb County. All of the property taxes in Cobb County are going up, and it's contributing to it. And yet you have all of these other, I'll put them air quotes, sweet deals for these developers where they're getting tax breaks for, these. Now, there have been also some stories here of late that people are starting to look into these, deals, and some of the cities and municipalities around are kind of shying away from it because the leadership and the elected positions, I think, folks will kind of look at it and like, well, I've lived in my home for 10 years. I've always paid my taxes. Why in the world is it our job to give these developers and make the developers more money? And on your side of town, I didn't know if there were any particular developments that you've heard about this trend. And I don't think that ultimately it really accomplishes, and again, in air quotes, affordable housing.
No, this is very eye-opening, especially here in the district that I'm running for, House District 99, is that, I don't know if you've heard of this before or not, but here in the district, we have a high population of homelessness, actually. But you don't really see them. They're actually staying in our, those hotels, motels, or Holiday Inns that are around the area. So many of our constituents, many of our voters are actually living in those motels as we speak because they can't even afford to buy a house or rent an apartment. So they're struggling living in these motels, trying to make sure that their family at least has a roof over their heads. Now, with the development that's happening, it's very eye-opening because it is taking a lot of money from the taxpayers, and now they're left with the bill to help pay for the development and the developer.
Yeah, and the prime example of that, I had not thought about that specifically, but if you happen to have been to San Francisco, California, where housing there is just astronomical. I mean, if you look at what housing costs in Metro Atlanta, go check out San Francisco because they have a huge issue, and they have all those folks, and it's exactly what you just talked about. I think they're called SROs, single residence or something like this. But you have all of you just be walking down a San Francisco street, and you just pass by the Sunshine Motel or something like this, and there are literally people that they're scrounging whatever money they have in order to stay at one of these places, and they're not the best places. I mean, I'm sure there's issues of crime. You never know who's going to be moving in and out, and a lot of people, the fortunate people that have decent jobs, they are able to live in nice places. as you just mentioned, you say, well, there's not a homeless problem because we don't see the people, but you have all of these people, as you just described, just struggling to even put some kind of roof over their head.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I know there's been studies, especially coming from United Way, where half of that population is actually children who are homeless that are staying in these motels. And that's just horrific just to hear about, because these children are our future, and their families are struggling, and they're not having all the help that they need or the resources that they need in order to have an actual home where they can live, do their homework, maybe when they get older get a job and trying to succeed in life. It's very difficult to see that this is happening in our modern time as we speak.
Yeah, and even I don't know if we were going to go into healthcare maybe for another time, but we have healthcare is extremely expensive, and yet doesn't have the best outcomes, when compared to other first world countries. And it's almost like parts of our state, parts of our country have become ultimately third world countries and it's just kind of dystopian at times. I mean, there was a gentleman that wrote about San Francisco that it's even become dystopian because you just walk around and it's just extreme poverty, and then you go just half a mile down the road and you just have these brand new developments, and those developers again probably got some sort of tax incentive to do that. I just shake my head. It boggles my mind.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. That is very frustrating to hear. Getting into the healthcare part, this actually happened just last year, and another time a couple of years ago where my mom had to go to the hospital for a couple surgeries. The first time is because she had appendicitis and they had to do surgery on her, and the second time she had to get surgeries because she had like a staph infection on her inner thigh and on her chin, where they have to drain everything out of those places. So we were stuck with the bill, like roughly $300,000, and we do not have health insurance at all whatsoever because we cannot afford it. So we're just still stuck with the bill, trying to pay for it little by little as much as we can. And I can see and tell why a lot of our voters or a lot of our constituents are struggling to make ends meet, because they have a hospital bill that they can't afford to pay off. They're living in our motels. They're not getting the proper, or they're not having the good jobs that they should be having, or the education that they deserve. So a lot of this does fall under many different aspects. And if we help each other with one way or another in healthcare, maybe helping somebody with their mental illness, or helping somebody pay for the hospital bill, they might be able to the other person might be more relieved and be able to do more in life that they should be doing.
Yeah. All great stuff. And I mean, I think we could probably talk for literally hours. But I wanted to, like I said, give you a platform to talk about yourself and some great stories that you've shared. Just kind of a recap again, the district you're running for, and a little more about yourself, just to wrap it up here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my name is Jorge Granados. I'm running to be the next state representative for House District 99, which covers the unincorporated part of Norcross, unincorporated part of Tucker, and unincorporated part of Lilburn here in Gwinnett County. I've worked at the Capitol for the past 3 years with Representative Brenda Lopez. Now that she's running for Congress, I'll be running for office myself, because the stories that I've mentioned is because of we were able to pull through because the community was able to give and help us through all of our struggles. Now I'm running for office because I want to give back to the community that has given me and my family so much over the years since I've been growing up.
Yeah, and just a prime example of what we talked about earlier in the call, but it just kind of hit me with another angle here. It's very interesting that the conservative, red leadership just basically has given up on your district. And that just in itself kind of, I think, speaks volumes. Mm-hmm. That, this administration that leads the state and has for quite some time, that they just shrug and say, well, we're just going to continue to cut taxes and take care of our own. We don't really care about these other districts. That's of deep concern. And I don't know how the state is really going to come to a realization that, that a lot of times folks that are voting red are not necessarily voting in their own interest.
That's very true. And then going back is that, yes, the Republicans have pretty much given up in the district, but there is a very small presence in the area. But we want to make sure that everyone's voices are being heard, so they know what's actually going on and they know what is expected of us when we get elected as elected officials. So we want to make sure that everyone is voting. We want to make sure that their voices are actually being heard, no matter what.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for joining. Was there anything else or other topics that you wanted to get on the recording here?
No, but I want to see if I could plug this in. If anyone wants to contact me, they can look me up on my website at www.jorgeforga.com. That is JORGEFORGA.com, or you can look me up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well.
Yep. I think that's actually how we connected. Instagram has become an interesting place for all different sorts of different things that you kind of get clouded in all the other social media. So I just try to, of all the time, I probably spend way too much on social media, but I try to always come back around and check, Instagram, because you can find some interesting folks like yourself there for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I use it often because, especially with the younger folks, they actually use Instagram more often than any other social media. So I'm more active on Facebook and Instagram, a few times on Twitter, but I try to use it as often as I can.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks, Jorge. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, and thanks for joining here.
All right. Thank you for having me.